Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you have your coffee in hand. I had Chick-fil-A for breakfast, and they have these frosted coffees that are absolutely delicious. So I'll be sipping on that, waking up here, going through the PGA DFS slate from this week. And this is honestly by far the most important piece of content that I'll be doing on a week-to-week basis, and something that I'm going to make a centerpiece here in 2023. On top of going through the process, the meta of PGA DFS, some of the strategy involved with tinkering our process. We're also going to track my results. We're going to do that both from like a numerical perspective, ROI, track some of the swings up and down that I have throughout the season, really just to give you guys some perspective on what a top level, somebody I'd consider a professional PGA DFS player is doing on a day-to-day basis. So there'll be a lot of transparency, a lot that I think you can learn from this process. And of course, if you guys want me to review your lineups, just sit back, learn a little bit something from everybody else. That's what we're here for too. So there's going to be a link in my weekly DFS stream to a community contest. I did mention that this week. So we did have 14 people get in there. Hopefully, as we move on, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And when you come here on Monday morning, we can go through your lineup in that contest. And I can tell you some of the things that went well, right? What I liked about your lineup, and maybe something that you can learn from it too. So it'll kind of be the structure here. We'll also go through my projections, my ownership projections, get an idea of maybe some of the projections I was spot on, some of the ones that maybe need a little bit of improvement, and maybe why that happened, because it's all algorithmic based for me. It's all numbers based. So I'm not going in there really tinkering them hand by hand. Got to figure out maybe what I need to do to make the algorithm better, right? We'll talk through that, all that sort of fun stuff. So I can see we have Mr. Space Lee already down in chat. What is going on? Hopefully having a great start to your week here. We're on quite a heater, so I guess we'll start with that, right? This is always going to be centered around my results, but we're going to open it up to everybody out there too. Screen sharing was canceled. Oh, I guess I missed something up there. Hold up. Let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Let's do that. Hopefully it's working this time around, and it looks like it is. Okay, we'll make it a little bit bigger for you guys. And yeah, we went on a little bit of a heater here. So I only entered one lineup. I was planning on doing a 3 max, a 20 max, and the contest selection, at least when I went to enter on Wednesday, right around 1 p.m., was absolute dog shit. I mean, the single entries were okay. They were a little bit smaller than what we see on a week-to-week basis. But the large field GPPs, I just knew there was going to be a ton of dupe trains. And some of the 3 max contests, there were only like 200 entries. Like they put out a $50 3 max, but it wasn't very big. It wasn't that much money up top there. So I wasn't quite enticed into it. So on and so forth. Almost every single contest was a little bit, left a little bit to be desired there. But the single entries were still okay. So that's what I stuck to. I entered one lineup. I entered all of the eggs into one basket there, and it worked out pretty well. So you can see I played a Scheffler, JT, Spieth. My 3 core picks, right? A Scheffler, a Burns, and a Cam Young, were of course featured in this lineup, but added in a Morikawa, who I expressed my love for there on that Wednesday live stream. I'm playing Jordan Spieth, and I tried not to give it away completely, but I was very much so hinting on that Wednesday live stream that JT was going to be in this lineup too. I thought he had a lot of upside, and at first he struggled, which I kind of expected, right? He was coming in rusty. But boy, oh boy, did he look like JT those last 7 to 8 holes, right? I mean, if he didn't start off so dog shit there on Sunday, I think JT could have very easily at least gotten up there with a Scotty Scheffler and a Victor Hovland. So ended up finishing 8th in the $100 single entry for $500. Entered the same lineup across it. What was this? The dog leg. So I guess this was, let's see, a $33 entry. Ended up turning that into $200. The free contest we did, I actually didn't end up winning it, which is interesting. We had a better lineup in there. Javelin, who actually had Victor Hovland in his lineup. That was a major reason for him having that success. You can see there's only 18% owned. So out of the 14 players, 2 guys ended up having Victor Hovland, and that was the nuts there. So hats off to Javelin. We'll talk about that lineup a little bit later. I cashed out for $60 in a $12 entry, right? So on and so forth. So it worked out pretty well, but I did enter this lineup into both the $20 GPP and the $5 GPP so that we can look at some of the winning lineups. So we're not just going to focus on my results. We are, of course, going to look at the winning lineups, some of the trains up top, because you can see here tied for 5th place. There was a train of, I believe, 7 lineups there, 6 lineups, which, if that ended up taking home first, I'm sure those guys would have been pretty happy. But the last time I checked, they were winning I think it was like $9,500 when they had that train up there in first place. So imagine that, right? Nerdy Tenor, by the way, one of the bigger DFS players, one of the bigger pros that we have on the scene, was a part of that dupe train. So, I'm pretty sure if he would have won, I don't know if he would have been very happy about that. Just, from the ROI perspective, when you're going out there, you're duping yourself 6 to 7 times. That's absolute death, because rather than winning $100,000 to first place, actually, so it wasn't this dupe train, right? It's only 6 lineups right there. So they were probably winning right about $22,000, $23,000. Where's the dupe train that I'm thinking of? It's this one at 23rd. So you can see up here at 23rd place, a lot of chalky players. It used all of its salary too. It tied 20 times, right? So that's the lineup that I'm thinking about. That lineup, whenever it was in first place, which was right around 3 p.m. there on Sunday, so towards the end of all of the action, it was winning $8,000-9,000, something in that range the last time I checked. So that's drastic. I mean, even if you finished with 6 guys tied for first and won, 20,000 as opposed to 100, it's not that big a deal, particularly if you're just a casual hobbyist when it comes to playing PGA DFS. But yeah, a pro like Nerdy Tenor, that's going to drive him crazy. So I'm pretty sure that he wishes he may have, pivoted off of a Tom Kim, most likely, right? Tom Kim far from an optimal play this week, and he was 40% owned. So that's why, for these professionals, I'm sure Nerdy Tenor does this with every slate that he goes through. You got to try and learn from your mistakes, right? And, when I'm doing a single entry, right, and I'm just entering it in smaller contests, how many were in this contest? I don't even remember. 222 entries. I don't have to worry about that nearly as much as when you're playing in, a contest down here with, I don't even know. Let's see the contest details here. 17, nearly 18,000 entries. And over here on the $5, let's look at that winning lineup. So at the top, we had a train that won first place. So a train of 4 lineups there at 619.5 points. And I guess this was the true optimal, because what was the other one that scored in first place? Oh no. So this guy Dirksen just absolutely killed it, right? Was able to take home that contest. But over here in the $5 contest, nobody had that 624 point lineup. So this guy over here, Dirksen, he went after it with, let's add up his salary right here. I'm almost positive that this left salary on the table, and he's going to make all the GPP bros look like absolute geniuses here if that's the case, because let's see, 10,900. I played the top 2 guys, so that's the part that feels bad here. But I faded Victor Hovland this week, so we're going to talk through my player pool projections. We're going to get to that side here in a second. But if I played, it's always the big if, right? If I played Victor Hovland this week, I definitely would have been close to the optimal, because look at this, guys. It has Morikawa, it had Cam Young, right, like I had in the other lineup, and then it had Sepp Straka at the bottom. Sepp Straka and Jordan Spieth were within, I believe, 2 to 3 fantasy points of each other, right? So let's say I still kept Jordan Spieth in there. Actually, did he outscore Sepp Straka? If he did, I'm going to go absolutely crazy. He did. so literally, right? It's a 1-to-1 pivot. Burns to somebody like a Victor Hovland, you can't afford it, right? I didn't have the salary for it. So I don't feel that bad about it, but we were relatively close to the optimal build. But when I want to add up here, so 6,900, we're going to add 2 more numbers, 6,700, and then 6,200 Straka. So yeah, he left $400 on the table. Now, this lineup below him, let's add up his salary, right? So if this lineup used all of the salary, it's just the GPP bros have won, right? It's one of the things that we've been waiting, we talk about all the time, right? Is leaving salary on the table is a way to get different and then not tie with 3 people for first place, like the guys in second would have, right? Or 6 people, like the guys that tied for 5th, or 20 people, like the guys that were tying for 23rd down there. Let's add up the salary. It may not have left salary on the table. It might have. Let's see. There were a lot of gaps in salary, so a lot of people left salary on the table just by default. It was just how much you left, right? I left $600 on the table in my single entry lineup, which we'll talk about. Whereas, let's see what these guys that duplicated themselves left on the table. So they left $500 on the table. So that's decent. That's enough salary, in my opinion, to leave on the table. But let's look at the players they took, right? Their lowest owned player was a Cam Young, right? Who was by no means a pivot play, right? He was 5% lower than the average of a 30% with a 20-player field. You just got to be careful about it, right? Up here, a 9.2% owned Straka was the difference, right? He was the pivot that you got to. And it's not like you had to pivot across the board, right? You still had 25% owned plus players across the board. Just one pivot. That's all it takes, right? That's all we preach here on the channel when we're talking about lineup construction is getting to one pivot. So we'll go ahead, sit back now, try and go through some of the lineups in the community contest. If you guys have a lineup that you'd like me to look at, figure out a way for me to look at your lineup, and we'll go ahead and review it for you. So if you can like take a screenshot of it on Gsluke, if you guys know what that is, and post it in the chat, and go ahead and take a look at your lineup that way. Otherwise, make sure you get in the community contest going forward, and we can look at the lineups that way. So my lineup specifically, doing a little bit of a deep dive here. I mean, we had the one stinker, right? Which I couldn't even say would be like a Jordan Spieth, right? He still scored 77 points. Sam Burns, right, scored 77 points. It was our lineup construction. The only reason I didn't get to a Victor Hovland, I didn't play, even a Matt Fitzpatrick, who was in that same range there at 90, he was like 90 something $100 in that range, was because I did not want to go to the bottom of the 6K. You had Corey Connors down there. You had a Kevin Kisner right down there at the bare minimum. Who else? A few other guys like $6,300, $6,400 players that were adequate, right? You saw Sepp Straka was in the GPP winning lineup over here. Billy Horschel, right, $6,100 was in a GPP winning lineup because it opened up the salary to take a Hovland as well. And that was just something that I wasn't comfortable doing for this week. I liked the win equity of a Sam Burns, right? That's why I talked him up as a core pick. I liked the win equity of somebody like a Jordan Spieth who's won this event before at Nassau, at Albany before. A lot of people forget that, right? It happened like 3-4 years ago at this point. But he has a decent track record of either winning or finishing in last place. So personally, I liked my lineup. I wasn't going to get off of it. I wanted more win equity over the salary flexibility. And I didn't think a Holland was going to win. I honestly didn't think a Fitz was going to win. I thought that top of the 8K, bottom of the 9K range was a little bit overrated, and that was certainly the case with Fitz, right? He, was certainly a little bit erratic through rounds 1 through 3, especially round 3, right? He shot like 4 over par. Victor Hovland, however, might just love this golf course, and he's shown that, right? At Mayakoba, kills it there. Puerto Rico Open, he had stellar results there before. Now he's not even able to go there, right? Because he's not in alternate field events. Let's think. He has specific golf courses where he just has elite course history. It's been correlated year to year, nearly going for a three-peat at the Mayakoba. It's getting to a point where, like, at Victor Hovland golf courses, you play him. And this isn't like unique to Victor Hovland. There's a few guys on the PGA Tour that we say this about. That could be a Bubba Watson. We usually say that about him at like Riviera, all of the Bubba Watson tracks, right? When he was playing on the PGA Tour, we used to say that about him quite a bit. Let's think. Tiger Woods has his tracks. That's right. Why later in his career, he was only playing at like 6 to 8 tracks on the PGA Tour because that's where he knew he could win, right? Bay Hill is like the perfect track for Tiger Woods. There's horses for courses, and it feels like Victor Hovland might be that kind of guy. And Jordan Spieth is that sort of player too. So just maybe a learning point going forward. Anywhere Victor Hovland has good course history, I think he has to be worth considering taking. And it's not like he was mega chalky here. Let's see. In the big GBPs, he was 42%. That's pretty chalky in the $5. And he was a little bit lower owned, I know, in the $20. 38.7%. So I would say that's just above average ownership. Like chalk, right, is a... Let's find a lineup with John Rahm in it. Because he didn't have that bad of a week, right? It's got to be somewhere towards the top. Maybe not. He was way too pricey, I guess. There he is. Okay. 56.5% owned, right? Let's see what he was in this contest. So over here in the $100 single entry, guys, look at this. This is outrageous. 71.2% owned. That's chalk, right? When you're talking about somebody being like 38, 40% owned, even like a Fitz, right? Like that's not really chalky. 42% owned. in this sort of contest when the average is 30%. But boy, oh boy, 70% owned John Rahm is the mega chalk of all chalk. I was already comfortable fading him at like 55, 60% owned. But yeah, 71.2%. I mean, I wish I entered more lineups into single entries this week. That's ridiculous. That's just a way to print money in some of these large field GPPs. So that was the idea. That's why I wasn't on the optimal build bet. I mean, outside of that, right? You had the two optimal guys up top. Morikawa and Young were the two optimal guys down low. It was just that middle tier range, right? A little bit of the lineup construction that got us. But that's just sometimes what's going to happen when you're in these smaller field contests when you only have one entry. Let's look at Nick's lineup. So I know you want to take a look at your lineup. You've been asking about it. So let's do that right now. And by the way, going forward, guys, right, on that weekly live stream, I'm going to be pumping that this contest link a lot, like trying to get this filled. I'm going to make it like a 75 person contest. Maybe eventually we get enough momentum around these streams, we can get a rake free contest, right? That's the hope, right? Because there's a lot of communities out there that are getting rake free contests. That would just be perfect because then it would be a plus EV contest to play, not just something that would be educational. So, yeah, let's talk through this next. So your lineup in the free contest finished in 13th out of 16 players, which obviously I know you're not very happy with that, but let's just talk through the strategy of your build. So you went with JT up top, which I loved. Obviously, lower owned play. It was the like pivot that you could get to up top. I think only me and you played him, right? So 18.8% owned. Yeah, me and you were the only guys to get to JT here. So that shows exactly the utility that I was talking about, right? Trying to get to that low owned play up top that still has the upside. Fitz wasn't very highly owned. He was higher owned elsewhere. So I think that was just a property of him being in my community contest, right? I don't really like Fitz, so I guess a lot of you out there don't like playing him either. That's interesting to know. Tommy Fleetwood there at 31%. I thought he was a decent play. His ownership, let's see what he was in the large field contest. And we're going to go through the projections here in a second too. So we'll be doing more of an in-depth analysis on the ownership here in a second, but let's see. Who are we looking for? We're looking for Fleetwood again. Let's see. He was towards the top. Actually, no, he scored a lot of fantasy points despite sucking in terms of his placement, but he was 36.6% owned. So, yeah, right about what he was in our contest over there. So I guess that makes sense. Burns, Morikawa, Connors really should have played a lot better. I loved that play, especially because he came in a lot lower owned than I expected. Actually, I keep clicking the wrong tab there. Sorry about that, boys. Connors came in 17.4% owned in contest. So yeah, he was a great pivot to get to. If this was in a large field GPP, which is, I know that you entered this as a single entry. It's the same sort of idea. I love the leverage that you have to the field, right? You took a few guys that you knew were going to be chalky, like a Fitz in Fleetwood. Burns just way higher owned in, the community contest because I talked him up this week. And I think a lot of guys just in our Discord really like the Sam Burns play. Like we've gone paid off in Sam Burns a lot. So a lot of guys like playing him there. He was much lower owned elsewhere. So Sam Burns' ownership, let's see where he came in. He was 24.4% owned. So yeah, the ownership numbers here are a little bit wonky, but I love what you were getting to. Your highest owned player was a Fitz, then a Morikawa, and then two real pivots, and then one just like averagely owned play. That's perfect in terms of ownership. Let's see your salary usage. So your top two players were 18,500, 25,800, 33,000. Okay, 39,900. So you left a lot of salary on the table in this lineup. So I like that, especially for this week. But, typically, right, we're not leaving that much salary on the table. So, wow, you really went overboard with the whole salary I left on the table thing. I love it there. You could have easily fit in, right, a John Rahm. You could have easily gone up and trying to take like a Scotty Scheffler if you wanted to, rather than one of these 6, 7K options. And you held the line there. You stayed true to it. I love that. That's a way to win, especially in like a smaller field contest. Like if it's all just the 6 and 7K options at the top of the board, which could have easily happened, like especially in this field, like it's still the like top 20 players in the world, then you hit the nuts. And like, let's say the top 6 players in the leaderboard, or like 5 of them are like 6 or 7K players, like that was more than reasonable. I mean, even if you only had 3 of them, you're going to win the GPP, right? Because every other lineup's going to have at most 1, maybe 2 of them in their lineups. And what they're going to have at most 2. That's if they hit the nuts on both of them. Whereas you played like 5 of them in your line. I guess 4, right? Because Fitz was in the 8K range. But yeah, I like that for single entry specifically. In GPPs, I feel like that's just not going to win. Like, I feel like you are giving up a little bit too much of the win equity, like of a Scotty Scheffler or John Rahm. But for single entries, like where you don't have to have the nuts, like let's see what took down the single entries that I was in. That's worth noting. 616. That's actually a really good lineup. What would that have done in these large field GPPs? It would have been top 5. So this guy had a really good lineup, but the other ones I was in, 604. Let's see. This is more of a larger field single entry, so still 604. Another large, actually, that's the large field GPP. So, yeah, so I guess that's the point. For like a single entry where you only have to have like, let's say 10, 15 points less than the nuts, I like that lineup, especially for like these smaller field events. So let's say we're playing WGC, right, where we have to, also think about some other constraints when we're building. Maybe we leave even more salary on the table. Let's think the Tour Championship, right? Like you were almost building the same sort of way because there's 30 players. That's kind of what I'm thinking, except the Tour Championship, right? You're also paying for the starting stroke. So that's the iffy part about the Tour Championship. But like WGCs, if we ever get another one of these, micro events where it's only like 20, 30 players, I like it. You say Connor's just drinking heavy the first 2 days. Yeah, if he didn't start off so horribly, he would have been up there at least like middle of the pack. He would have been a decent fantasy scorer. So yeah, I liked the play. Is it first or last? Yeah, that's the idea. So yeah, I like it, Nick. As long as you're you know what you're getting at with that, right? First or last, you know the deal. So I guess one thing to note is that the QBE shootout is this week. We're going to go through the schedule here. So just a little aside, getting away from the analysis talk, right? It's a little bit redundant if we do that for an entire hour here, right? So we'll sit back, talk about what's coming up on the PGA Tour schedule, also on the DP World Tour, because I'm going to try and sprinkle in some content here over the next month for some of the smaller field events that we're going to get. So on the PGA side, at the QBE shootout this week, it's over there in Naples. I'm probably going to go to it because it's like a 2.5-hour drive. The field's pretty sweet. You have Cam Young, Lexi Thompson, obviously one of the best LPGA players. Some decent like mid-tier guys there. I'm not going to call them out. Nelly Korda is like my like celebrity crush, like literally like my favorite golfer in the world. So kind of want to go to see her play. Never seen her play in person before. But like, look at this field. Like it's not anything crazy. I get to see Max Homa and Kisner tee it up together, right? So I'm probably going to go over for a day, see what's going on. Maybe like one of the days they're doing a 2-ball, so I could see them go out there and shoot like 60s, something like that. So yeah, I'm thinking I'm going to go over there. So yeah, Keith Mitchell, who's he teaming up with? JJ Spawn. Okay. McCarthy's with Nelly Korda. That should be a pretty good team, actually. I think people are going to sleep on like the teams that have like a woman on them. And I wouldn't, because literally Nelly Korda is the best, female player in the world, or at least one of them. I don't know. She doesn't hit it that much shorter than some of the other tour pros out there. And a lot of people have said that they think that they would be a lot more competitive on the PGA Tour than people think. Not like winning, not like finishing top 5, top 10. I do think there's constraints to it, but I think that like a Nelly Korda, maybe a Lexi Thompson, because she's also relatively long off the tee, could maybe make a few cuts on the PGA Tour. I mean, I believe Lexi Thompson, I forget there's a woman that made it on the US Open through the cut before. Like it's not as crazy as some of these people out there try to make it out to be. Like it's much more competitive than you think. So it'll be interesting to see. I think it'll prove a lot of those haters wrong if they go out there and play well this week. So I might go out there and watch it. On the DP World Tour side, there's a little bit more going on because you can see after the QBE, they don't return until the Century Tournament of Champions. They do have the match going on. So that's actually, I believe, the week after, where that's going to be, Rory and Tiger Woods versus Jordan Spieth in Justin Thomas. So that'll be on Prize Picks. I'm assuming they'll have some sort of props for that. So I'll be covering that. There's the PNC Championship that's going to be going on too. So they'll have coverage of that. But nothing real going on until the Tournament of Champions. So that's the next PGA Tour event. On the DP World Tour side, they still have stuff going on, which I love. pretty much right up until the week before Christmas. You have the Alfred Dunhill Championship. That's in South Africa, so that's not the Dunhill Lynx, right? Which is easy to confuse because they have a similar name. That's the one over there in St. Andrews. This is the one over there in South Africa. And then you have the Afro-Asia Bank Mauritius Open. That's a new one for me, guys. And that's going to be in Mauritius, which I honestly have no idea where that is. So cool. There's a few events going on. There's probably going to be some prize pick stuff posted. And if I really get bored, which I think I'm going to over the next 2 weeks without some golf, I know we got football going on. I'm going to have a lot more content out on that side. Might have to play some of this DP World Tour stuff. Or get into it maybe on the DFS side or whatever. But let's get back into actually some of the projections here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my other tab here. And this is going to be the transparency side of things, right? Actually going through an analysis of my projections, which I can guarantee you guys, no other professional is willing to do this out there. None. I can guarantee you, because I've never seen somebody do this before. Go through their projections that they're publishing on a week-to-week basis and letting the world critique them, right? From a projected point standpoint, where I have all of that over here. You can see their points scored to an ownership perspective, right? Where I have my projected ownership right here, my projected points over here on G, and the actual ownership over here at L, and the actual points scored over here on N. And the idea here, right, is to try and figure out where things went well and things maybe didn't go so well, right? Because everything I do is with an algorithm. It's all numbers based. It's all going to be based on modeling. Because, if you're not using modeling, if you're not going through and using projections, then you're just trying to take a guess, right? And in DFS, right, there's, ownership. You play that game. That makes a lot of sense to me. But if you're just looking about, players at the same ownership, trying to make like black and white decisions, I always boil that down to the numbers, right? Because at the end of the day, we have internal biases. Like I love playing Jordan Spieth. I love playing Justin Thomas. And boy, oh boy, right? They were in my single entry this week, right? That's a critique I have to make of myself. I decided to be a little bit of emotional and play the guys that I wanted to play rather than getting to, let's say, like a Victor Hovland, right? It was the nuts who probably would have had me in contention to take home GPPs with my single entry lineup, right? There's things that we're going to learn from, right? And that's why we're going to do this. So you can see my single entries on here, but this is in my 3-max pool. So I had a 3-max pool made. I was actually in 3-max contests. So I had my player pool on there for that. But I ended up withdrawing my entries and just going over to a single entry. So I still have that on here too. This is the poll that I published on my Patreon. Because most people out there were playing a 3-max. Some of them were playing like 5-6 lineups in the large field GPP. So I wanted to give them a little bit more of an extensive player pool. So that's what that is. But this is like the actual set of players that I played, right? Because I only played that one lineup for this week. So let's go through this. At the top, you had Victor Hovland. He was the big miss, the big whiff of the week. But at the end of the day, I'm not that worried about it. My modeling hated him. He was coming in with some of the worst form. I mean, when you compared him, per price, he was coming in with by far the worst form in that range from a course fit perspective. And this is not counting course history, right? So I get a lot of questions about like the fit column and like how that's calculated. That's a shots gained fit. That's where I'm looking at a player's shots gained profile, types of metrics that are correlated to success at a golf course, and trying to figure out what types of golfers should play well. The number one correlator this week was around the green play, shots gained around the green. And of course, Victor Hovland's like one of the worst around the green players that we've had on tour, maybe ever. And he goes out there and wins, right? So like the metrics, right? Sometimes they stray us in the wrong direction, but he's won the last 2 years. So now, even if the stats are telling us that around the green is really important around this venue, we probably in the future shouldn't just be eliminating guys because of that, because we've seen a Victor Hovland break that sort of mold. And that's really the case for any event, right? I don't think you should ever eliminate a player just based on one stat alone, right? Because golf's a comprehensive game. A stat like around the green can be a little bit muddling anyways. It could be a little bit misleading because when you're missing greens, that means that you're not in position, right? You're not going out there and scoring. And historically at this event, it's a birdie fest, right? So if you're relying on around the green play at a birdie fest, do we really think you're going to be in contention to begin with? Probably not, right? So that's that's the thing I think you have to be careful with some of the stats. So just something to learn going forward. The stats aren't always the holy grail out there, but hey, I think if you're doing anything right, I'd rather be using stats modeling to try and make my picks than picking out of a hat. That's because I've literally had people go like, "Oh, you stat guys, that's like all you do." It's like, yeah, it is all I do. I think that's the way to do things because I'm not going to pick numbers out of a hat, right? And just hope that I'm right. There has to be a rhyme to the reason. The two guys up top that we played went decently well. First off, the ownership on Victor, we were pretty much right on it, right? 36.6%. It was 38.7% owned in the $20 GPP, the large field contest. Scotty Scheffler, I actually was a little bit more bullish on his ownership than most. A lot of that was because of how many people got to Jon Rahm, right? I had him 52.5% owned. He actually came in higher owned at 56.5%. So even more people than I expected got to him. You can see even JT was a little bit lower owned than I expected. So just, that ownership that was getting sucked up to a Jon Rahm just really took away from those other two players. So that's something that I noticed. It's something I noticed about the actual ownership is if you multiply it out and get the total salary, the average field left about $500 on the table. So a good amount of people out there, particularly in like a 150 max sort of scenario, were willing to leave that salary on the table. And if you're entering 150 lineups, you have to leave salary. So that would have been expected. I mean, unless everybody was just entering every combination exactly at 50 grand, you're going to see a bunch of salary left on a week like this. So I'm not reading into that too much just because of the way that salaries were structured this week. But you can see the rest of our ownership outside of two cases was pretty solid, right? Within like 2%. You can see Scotty was like 8%. Down here, Spieth, I was 5% off. He came in a little bit lower owned than I expected. But we were significantly off on a Tony Finau. Now, this is like the one ownership spot I don't understand. I thought it was going to be like 52% owned. I mean, my algo, especially with his price tag at $9,300, he was my number one course fit, number two total model ranking, just popping off the board in every metric that you could possibly imagine. The price tag was way lower than it probably should have been, and he was only 40% owned. That was only 0.5% higher than a Xander Schauffele. To me, that was crazy because, I mean, look at this. Xander's still decent, right? Number 7 in total model ranking. The projections aren't that drastically off, but Tony Finau was $600 cheaper, and he was only 0.5% higher owned. That was a little bit astonishing to me. It feels like people kind of galaxy brained themselves out of it, where they saw ownership projections, and across the board, everybody had Tony Finau's ownership pretty high. At least like 40%. Some people had them a little bit higher like me, closer to like 50, 52%. Some people were a little bit more conservative about it. But either way, I don't think people thought he would be in the 30s or just 0.5% higher than somebody like a Xander Schauffele. So that was a little bit surprising. Again, I think people just kind of like galaxy brain themselves out of playing him, kind of talk themselves out of it. And then what was it? Billy Horschel. Yeah, Billy Horschel came in way higher owned than I expected. And honestly, I don't know why. I feel like there's a huge negative sentiment against Billy Horschel. I thought he was going to be this leverage play you could get to at like 15, 16%. So I would have played if I took him, in that contest, that 3 max in like one of my lineups. And I would have assumed that I had that leverage, right? 33% to like a 16, 17% owned player. And I would have hardly even been over the field, right? Because he was 27.2% owned. So that was surprising to me. I was not expecting that. A lot of that was price tag. So I don't understand why Tony Finau was lower owned. I guess the galaxy branding happened. This was just a byproduct of price tag, right? $6,100. He had much better form than a Corey Connors. Sepp Straka, right, was like last in the field in every category. So at $6,200, he remained relatively low owned. Like Kisner, right, there was a lot of negative sentiment around him from like people like myself talking about how bad a course fit that he was, right? He was number 19 across the board. So by process of elimination, I mean, he's number 4 in recent form ranking, killing it with the irons coming in. I mean, what was it telling us here? I know that, again, we're not like, breaking down a golf slate here, right? We don't have golf for like 3 more weeks for one of these larger slates, but look at this, 1.2 shots gained per round on approach, over a stroke per round. I guess that's why the ownership was so much higher. I guess I should have seen it coming, but that was a blind spot for me. So I like to point out the spots that went well, right? Us winning money this week, but I also like to try and point out some of the things that maybe didn't go so well, so I can learn from them in the future. Important things to note is sometimes you're going to have guys that get galaxy brained. We've seen this happen before. There's been times where like a Patrick Cantlay is projected to be like 20% owned. And then at the Shriners, he came in like 37, 38% owned the next day, where people think they're getting a lower owned play than they are. Nobody can get off of a Patrick Cantlay because of the course history. And of course, he nearly won. Actually, he may have even won that golf. I think he nearly won that golf tournament, was still in the optimal lineup. I mean, it's the weird ownership stuff is just going to happen. So sometimes it's unpredictable, but it's worth noting and trying to at least consider in the future. From the points scored perspective, there was a variety of lineups that got you towards the top, but every single one had to have a Victor Hovland and a Scotty Scheffler. A Justin Thomas was a little bit more optional. I saw a lot of people that got to the top with a Xander Schauffele instead, because then you didn't have to take nearly as many value picks, right? You didn't have to get down to the $6,100 Billy Horschel, which we saw in a GPP winning lineup. You didn't have to get down to a Sepp Straka at $6,200. So there was a little bit more flexibility up top, but the two guys you had to have were Scotty and a Hovland. Obviously, one of them was a core pick for us. That was a hit, and one of them was a fade. So that's why I was a little bit hit or miss this week. After that, you had a secondary tier of these guys from like 90 to upwards to 107 points. Actually, let's put JT in that top tier with those top two. But then this next tier from like Cam Young down to Morikawa. Morikawa and Young were the absolute nuts as value picks. So you definitely had to be there. And outside of that, you weren't being hurt by these guys in the mid-tier range, but you wanted maybe two at the very most in your lineup, right? You didn't want to have, 3 or 4 of the guys in this range, because then that's taking your lineup. So a Tony Finau, though he was like the 7th highest scoring player on the slate, probably really hurt your lineup, right? Because you were investing $9,300 into a player that scored, what was it, like 16 less points than a Xander, even more less than somebody like a Justin Thomas, right? 28 points less. Even worse, the further up the board that you go. That's why chalk is at least, especially if he was 52% owned, right? If we were right about his ownership projection, would have been an even more egregious play. But 39%, I guess I understand it. I don't think Tony Finau was a bad play at all, at least, knowing the ownership after the fact. But boy, oh boy, 52% would have been great. If we had 52% on Finau, and then obviously the 56% on the Jon Rahm that he came in at, would have been beautiful. And the whole Billy Horschel thing, so be it. We'll learn from that going forward. But yeah, that's all I've got for the stream, guys. Obviously, not that much to talk about with a 20-player field. If there were more players, we'd have a lot more to talk about from the projection side. But this is definitely something I want to have going forward, right? Something where we can look at the player pool, talk about everything, look at the ROI, projections, all that sort of fun stuff, and try and improve our process. And on the weekly live stream, so Wednesdays at 7 p.m., going to go through all of the community contest stuff. So we're going to, introduce it again to everybody there. And I'm going to put the link down in the chat there. So if you're looking for access to it, to have your lineup reviewed like we went through Nick's, that's how we're going to do so. So make sure to go ahead, get in that contest for next week, so we can actually go through your lineups here, right? Give you some feedback on your lineup, or just maybe to brag, right? Maybe you take home the contest and you want to talk your shit, right? That's what this contest, this stage is here for. So we'll be doing that. Travis says, not having Victor killed your chances. Didn't really kill mine. So I think you may have just hopped in here, man. Depending on what kind of contest you're in, it really didn't kill me, right? So if we look at my my results here, so Gsluke here, $200 out of 33. I won $500 in this one without Victor. It killed your chances to win the large field GPP, but in single entries, that sort of thing, it was just all about lineup construction, because you had a JT and Scheffler that still scored pretty well. By avoiding a Hovland, you didn't have to go down to the bummers that at like $6,000 that didn't score any points. So it depends, man. Like if it depends what contest you were in. So no, I'll leave it at that. I'm not bummed about not playing Victor. He's an absolute scrub. So I'll leave it at that. Best of luck for this week, guys. I know it's a lot of football, right? There's not really golf going on. But over these next few isolated weeks, best of luck if you guys play Prize Picks on the European Tour, also on the PGA side. But I'll catch you guys next time.